This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today. Our guest is Conrad Madsen. Thanks for being on the show, Conrad.
Thanks for having me, Whitney. I appreciate you inviting me to this forum here today. I'm looking forward to having some fun with you.
Yeah, me as well. And a little about Conrad, innovation, tenacity, and servanthood. Those are qualities which define Tom Landry, who was Conrad's idol growing up. Those principles now permeate his company, Paladin Partners, as he drives forward, building a one-of-a-kind give-back platform in Dallas commercial real estate. I look forward to hearing more about that. He's consistently recognized by the Dallas Business Journal and DCEO magazine as one of the heavy hitters, power brokers in commercial real estate. Conrad specializes in tenant representation, project leasing, land and building sales, investment property sales, and corporate services consulting for clients. Conrad, welcome to the show. I'm grateful to have you on. I know you have some massive amount of experience in this industry. And so looking forward to hearing about just your path, getting into commercial real estate. And let's dive into your focus right now.
Sure. I know. I appreciate that. Before we get started, Whitney, I just would like to tell you, thank you for your service first and foremost. To me, a lot of people take for granted the freedoms that this country has because of men like yourself who served our country. And thank you so much for your service to America. That means a lot to me. And I
appreciate that.
I love just networking and trying to help veterans in general, because it's a tough gig a lot of those guys go through, and especially after they get back from serving our country, where you and I are so fortunate to live in.
No doubt. Well, thank you for that very much, Conrad. And give us a little more about yourself and just show us that path into commercial real estate.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a small town guy. I did not grow up in what they would consider the big city here in Dallas, Texas. I actually grew up in deep South Texas in a little bitty town called Mission. It's right next to a bigger town called McAllen, which some folks have heard of. It's 5 miles from the Mexican border. You know, growing up was a different life. I didn't grow up with much, and most of my families were just, farmers. That's how they all immigrated there way back in the late 1800s and such. But, how commercial real estate came to be, it's an interesting path. My grandmother actually sold real estate growing up. So I was kind of around, her selling some homes and things of that nature. My dad had a manufacturing business, and so I was kind of always inside of what you'd call a warehouse or a plant or what have you as a kid. And so I was kind of always amazed by real estate to a degree, but it was a long path to get there. After college, it's funny, I noticed that you also served in the police, I believe, for the state of Kentucky, if that's correct.
That's right.
And what's interesting is my degree is actually in criminal justice. It's just so funny how, a lot of people get in this business, they got finance backgrounds and all these other, real estate concentrations. And here I am, a criminal justice guy. And now I'm, practicing real estate on a daily basis. I thought the FBI was going to be my long-term career path, but I had an internship with them in college. But then I got out of college and I realized, well, I didn't speak a foreign language. I wasn't a CPA or an attorney. So it was like, go get a real job and then come back if you want to apply. And so long story short, I thought I'd go to law school. I ended up working for a law firm, just kind of doing remedial stuff, filing documents at the courthouse to get a feel for that while I was studying for the LSAT. Met a guy who was a recruiter. This is in the .com era. And he was servicing a little company called broadcast.com back in the day that was Mark Cuban's company that he sold to Yahoo for like $4 billion. So he's placing all these people, making a ton of money in the .com era. And so I thought, well, I'll give recruiting a shot. So I did recruiting for about 3.5 years, enjoyed it, knew it wasn't my long-term game, but it taught me some incredible phone skills, which, as you know, Whitney, being in real estate, you got to talk. It's a communication game. And so you got to talk to people. And recruiting taught me a ton about how to communicate with people. But pulling the whole Tom Landry story into commercial real estate, well, obviously, I grew up in Tom Landry's hometown, which is Mission, Texas. A lot of people don't know that. Obviously, Tom was the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys for 29 years. He had 20 straight winning seasons back in the day. But most importantly, Tom was known for his character and who he was as a man and how he carried himself. A lot of people talk about his wins and successes and Super Bowl titles and how he put, the Dallas Cowboys on the map, in the 70s. But really, you talk to so many people that knew Tom, and boy, they all say the same thing. Never probably met a better man in my life. And that's pretty powerful. And so obviously being a Tom Landry fan, I was a Roger Staubach fan, right? Captain America was leading America's team back in the day in the late 70s when I was a small pup. And I saw what Roger did in commercial real estate. Well, Roger's corporate headquarters was in the same building, or it shared a gym with the same apartment complex that I lived in. And long story short, I got to know some of the brokers by just being at the gym every day, and finally got the courage to ask one of the guys out for lunch, and went up to their offices afterwards. And I was just, in awe, because I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe like Roger's probably down the hall, here. Long story short, a couple of the brokers gave me some time. A guy named Scott Collier and a gentleman by the name of Tom McCarthy. Tom really pointed me in the right direction. Staubach didn't have any opportunities for me at the time, but he told me some different firms to call, and I could use his name. And you fast forward 20 some odd years later, and I'm actually, one of my best friends is Connor McCarthy, which is Tom's son. And I didn't know Tom or Connor from Adam 20 years ago. It's funny how life works.
It is funny how life works. Even how different skills that you learn there have helped you obviously to go to the next thing, right? Even if it seemed unrelated, just those skill sets through the phone conversations that you had as a recruiter. I mean, now moving into commercial real estate were so useful. So, commercial real estate now, you've been in commercial real estate for a number of years now. I guess, speak to that individual who's in that transition right now. Maybe they are in the shoes you are, they have a different job somewhere, but they're looking at commercial real estate. Are they, should they ask a few brokers out, to go out to lunch or something to ask questions? Who should they be speaking to ensure that's the right path for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing about breaking into this commercial real estate industry, is you kind of know it's not like you're on job boards and there's just job postings everywhere. If you want to get into commercial real estate, you got to pick up and I tell this to all the college graduates I speak to in front of all the time. I go, don't send them, just email me resumes. Like, if you want to break into this business, write handwritten notes, pick up the phone, cold call the principals at these organizations, and tell them that you're interested in getting into commercial real estate. And if you talk to enough people, and if you impress enough people, there will be an opportunity that arises for you. From a brokerage perspective to asset management to property it really doesn't matter really what asset class, or what specialty within commercial real estate. It's more of just getting out there and networking. And as you know, it's all about networking.
No doubt about it. And, is there a way though that you could suggest that someone could stand out? Because there's a lot of noise, right? For opportunities in this space. There are a lot of people, trying to have those phone calls or reaching out. I like what you said though, even the handwritten notes and don't give up, right? Keep calling. Keep calling. Right. But is there any ways that you've seen people, or maybe that you did, that could help you to stand out above the noise?
It's all about standing out. As you know, the most successful brokers in this business, they have one common trait, and it's persistence, right? There's no two ways around it. Anybody that's successful in this business, for the most part, unless they grew up with a silver spoon, and are hand-fed deals, most of everybody is just persistent, and persistence wins. And so doing different things like you said, just like kids nowadays just will send emails. They won't pick up the phone. So if you pick up the phone and leave messages, and you leave me 1 or 2 or 3 messages, I know that you're persistent. And because of that, I will definitely get you on my calendar. And if I can't help you, I will always point you in the right direction, because my whole deal is, somebody gave me time 20 years ago, and I'll give anybody time nowadays if they want to break into this industry.
Our guest is Anna Kelley. Thanks for being on the show, Anna.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's an honor to have you on the show. Anna and I were just talking about, I think it was 2 years ago, we were speaking at an event together, and I just heard part of her amazing story then and said, man, she's going to be a great guest for the show one day, but she's going to do big things, even better than that. She has an amazing mission that I'm looking forward to hearing more about today, and really just sharing with the listeners. I think it's great to expose yourself a little bit to others that are pushing with a bigger mission than just financial success. But we'll get into that. But she's a full-time real estate investor, active ownership in 1,200 doors. She grew up in Section 8 housing and through real estate created financial freedom for herself and her family. Through her multifamily syndication, she now focused on going beyond financial returns to creating meaningful impact in the lives of the people living in her communities. And welcome to the show. I know you have such an impactful story and just really path to getting to where you're at now. I'd love to hear some about that. I know it's going to affect the listeners, and they are going to learn a lot from you. I know even from as young as you want to go back, because I know you have such an amazing story. I'd love for you to share a little bit that will impact the listeners, and then let's move up to how you're making such a meaningful impact, and probably more people now than you ever imagined. Through all your residents.
Yeah, absolutely, Whitney. I started out. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my earliest memory, really, I was about 6 years old, and we left Pasadena, Texas, right outside of Houston, in the middle of the night. My mom was pregnant, me and my sister, and she was leaving an abusive marriage, and violence and tears. And I just remember being up in the middle of the night, driving back to San Antonio, where she was from, to start life over. And we, slept on my grandparents' couch, and she eventually found a job as a leasing agent in an apartment complex. And so we moved into this Section 8 apartment complex. My mom was the leasing agent, single mom, and she worked also at night. She waitressed at night just to make ends meet and to be able to provide for us as a single mom fleeing an abusive relationship. And growing up in Section 8 housing, it was tough. We lived in a nicer area, but we lived in the projects of the area. And so, there was drugs, there was violence, fights, those kind of things. And that's all I really saw was that kind of lifestyle in poverty and fend for yourself. And, my mom had this resilience to work 2 jobs and do whatever it took to make ends meet and provide for her kids. But it was a really hard lifestyle. And one of the things that I saw, because I did go to a good school, I saw other families who had, a cohesive family unit, who had a mother and father who both worked, and they seemed to have it all, right? So from the outside looking in, I thought the solution is I need to make sure I get a good job, get a degree, and can take care of myself and be independent so that I'm never dependent on a man to take care of me if he ended up being abusive. And of course, that's not all I think about today, but it really framed me as a person to think about how can I get an education, beat the cycle of poverty, change what the outcome is going to look like for me. And that really got me down the path of, working hard, getting good grades, getting a degree. And I did that. I was very determined, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out of this. And I landed myself after college. I worked full-time while I went to school full-time, graduated in 3 years, and came out and was offered a job for Bank of America to go through their private banking and financial advisory program and to advise their ultra high net worth clients in their bank. And that was the first time in my young 20s that I really knew anything about money. And I'm like, I don't know even how to budget my own checking account. And I'm going to start talking to people about how to, what to do with their money when they have it. But I'm so thankful that I had that, because it really opened my eyes to there's a lot of people that know how to manage their money. And if I really want to do well, it's not just about getting a good job and making good money, but I got to figure out how to manage my money well and invest my money so that one day, I'll really have this independence and be able to provide better for my own family, to not ever have to end up in battered women's shelters and relatives' couches and things like that. So that's kind of my beginning and how I got started into thinking about investing. But it was several years further before I started thinking about real estate.
So it's interesting how upbringings like that, just And it affects everyone, right? And I mean, all of us have stories or things that have happened to us, but such an experience at a young age can definitely just change the whole trajectory of where you're headed, right? And for you, you became very determined. It's interesting just to hear that. And I can relate somewhat, especially through military and law enforcement and just training like that. And it sounds like yours, is a very different story, but can become very determined depending on what happens to us, right? And for you, man, you were very determined. You were very successful. You got into Bank of America. Now you're working with extremely high net worth individuals. Tell us, what are a couple of things? It's just interesting working with high net worth individuals from that capacity. A couple things that you took from that have helped you in the apartment syndication business.
Yeah, so many things, because that was just kind of the beginning. But what was really interesting, I remember I started out in private banking in the late 90s. And so I had this client back then, interest rates were high, and what kind of returns were in the stock market and in annuities and CDs, they were all pretty high, much higher than what they are today. And I remember having a conversation with an older gentleman, and you have to realize I was like 23 years old and this young blonde thing. And this older man's looking at me like, honey, you got so much to learn, but I'll listen to your spiel, And I told him about these returns we can make. I remember it was in the teens, but I don't remember the number. But he laughed and he said, I make much more than that in my real estate investments. And I'm like, real estate investments? I've never heard of real estate investments. I've gone through all this training and I can tell you about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, annuities, life insurance, et cetera. But nobody taught me about real estate. So that kind of piqued my interest to think, I need to learn more about this real estate thing. And about a year later, I realized I'm throwing away a lot of money on rent. And I thought, I'm going to not throw my money away on rent. I think I'm going to buy a condo because I can live in it for free, or basically something that's an investment. And then down the road, I'll keep it as a rental property to bring in a little extra income, because he had rentals. So it just gave me that little bit of info that said, wait a second, these really wealthy people don't just invest in the retail things that I know about, but they also think outside the box and invest in real estate. So that was one thing. The other thing that I really took away that I think really helps me as an investor to get to where I am today, as well as now as an operator and syndicator, is that I don't just think about, I need a building of a certain size or a certain number of units, or I've just got to get any deal that my investors will like. I really think of all investments from an investment strategy standpoint. Through our lifetimes, we go through phases of, initially we need income. And so we're in the business of wealth accumulation, cash flowing things, right? Then eventually we move to a place where we want to focus on growth, and we can take a little more risk. We can set some money aside, not necessarily the bucket of money that we need to live on day to day. And then eventually we have to start really thinking about preserving and protecting what we've built, right? So as an investor, learning those things through my training, as well as working with people that were in each different phase of that financial trajectory of growing wealth and financial freedom, has allowed me to really look at investments with a lens of, do I really want to do this deal? What are my personal financial goals? Where am I in that, trajectory of financial growth? And where are my investors? And how can I marry the right opportunities to actually meet the financial goals that we're trying to achieve, rather than just buy a deal because it has a good IRR and I hope that there's some upside? So I think those were my main two takeaways.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.